Welcome to Alexandrians with Dan and Karim, where I interview authors, both living and dead ones, through the power of AI. Today's guest is David Werdiger, a family enterprise advisor, tech entrepreneur, and best-selling author on wealth transition. In this conversation, we talk about David's journey, what he learned from growing up in a wealthy family, why he chose not to join the family business and instead make his own path, how he built and sold his own companies, why he now teaches ultra high net worth individuals to cultivate wealth and wisdom across time, and what he personally learned from engaging with the wealthiest individuals in the world. We also discuss lessons drawn from the Holocaust, which many of his family members suffered from, the art of writing your own life story and why it's not enough to be a side character in your own myth, the commandments of wealth, and how long-term thinking can help us as a society to overcome division and build stronger communities. Enjoy this episode, and if it speaks to your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with other sovereign-minded individuals. And please buy the books of the authors that are featured on this podcast in order to support this show in general. David, so happy to have you on the show.
Thanks very much, Daniel. It's morning for you, early evening for me. You've got coffee, I've got something else.
I have to say I'm very jealous. Yesterday night in Berlin, I couldn't go out to do this podcast, and otherwise I would have a little bit of a hangover right now. So thanks so much for sparing me the aches of that. First question, what is the story and meaning of your name?
My name? Wow. So it's actually a bit of a German name, but my father was from a small town in Poland near Krakow called Sosnowiec. But that was sort of known as the Zagłębia region of Poland, and that was close to the German border. So it's a bit of a German name, and it actually means worthy. That's what he told us anyway.
Very beautiful. My culture, my father converted later to, like, when my father came to Germany as a spy and he met my mother, he was supposed to raise money for the party from Lebanon which sent him. And then he met my mother, fell in love, and turned his life on this whole backstory there and converted to Judaism in a way. So my name, Daniel, is a name from the Hebrew also, which was giving me for the old stories of the document. I have a great love for the meanings of names and their story. And I think sometimes I feel they even have a little bit of an omen or a prophecy installed into them, or at least something that affects our behavior. I saw on your blog one of my favorite.
It's interesting you say that. Sorry to interrupt you, because you asked me about my name and I went for my surname. I didn't go about my first name, and there's a bit of a story to that too.
Please
so I'm the youngest of five by a gap of 5.5 years, and my father survived the Holocaust, and so 3 out of 4 siblings carry the names of his parents and his sister who were murdered. And another sister, she carries the name of my mother's grandmother. She was born within a year of her passing. So it's a Jewish tradition to name after dead relatives. But when I was born, my mother said, you know what? I never had the opportunity to choose a name. I would like to choose a name for my child. And she chose the name David because she likes the name. And she says, I'm named after King David. So, David means beloved. And so, I'll go with that.
Great. I want to make this more about you, but you and I connected about many of the projects where you have been a great voice of wisdom, but I feel also you've seen me in the earliest stage, in the infancy of my ventures, and you've been very encouraging. But my story really started with a story of my father that involved actually the name David, which is very interesting to me because my father was, after he turned his back pretty much on the regime and converted to becoming a Jew, that's a death sentence in many Muslimic countries. So he lived in the underground for 30 years and even still has no passport. And at one point he was doing his persecution in prison. And they tried to assassinate him there with poison. And one of the things he said, and we had a great correspondence over letters. I think I told you this in one point that helped me to get my life in order. But after this poisoning, he said that he had a visitation of some ancestor that told him how to counter this poison. And he mentioned it was King David that appeared to him and told him how to counter the poison, pretty much. And he survived as a consequence of it, out of his own saying. So the name King David has a very special meaning in my family because it's of the story my father used to say. So it's a good name for sure. Your parents picked for you.
That's amazing.
Yeah. One of the quotes I like about your website is from Anna Karenina. It's all happy families are alike. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. You've worked with many great families, but how did you grow up, and what was your family like, if I may ask?
So my family, so as I said, my father survived the Holocaust. My mother was from what's now Ukraine, and she was in Uzbekistan during the war. So both my parents grew up through the war, the Second World War, that is. Separately found their way to Australia, married in Australia. Now, we're talking the late 40s, early 50s. And it was a time when a lot of Jews were coming from mostly Eastern Europe, refugees of the war, some of them stateless, many of them having survived the Holocaust, suffered immense loss. And Australia, for a number of reasons, probably two reasons principally, was a haven for those Jews. Firstly, there was the immigration policy. Australia was welcome to take them. And second of all, Australia was really far away. And I think a lot of them said, I want to get as far away from there as possible and start afresh. So that was my parents sort of starting afresh. My mother came with her whole family. My father was all alone, but he had some cousins who were in Australia. So, and my father joined his cousins in business and was quite successful with them. So I grew up in what I call a business family. My father was a workaholic. He was a micromanager. Work was everything. But for him, work was about providing for his family and building for them a secure financial future. And as I said to you, in birth order, my parents had 4 children in the space of 5 years or so, then a big gap, and then me. So I grew up somewhat as an only child because I wasn't close to my siblings in age, didn't have a close sibling relationship. And I was also, as a child, back then I self-described as shy, or people would describe me as shy and a loner. And that's what I was. I was quite introverted back then. But I grew up around this family, and it was a loving family. We were close to our cousins on both sides, the family that we had. And I was quite a docile student in school, and very good at some subjects and not that good at others. Very good at the sciences, not very good at the humanities back then. And so growing up in the family, I was exposed to the business from a young age. And, that means hearing about it, and my father would ask me to come in every now and then and help in the business. And so I grew up around that, and I guess that formed some of my views on family business. I'm not sure if that's where you wanted to go with this.
No, it's very interesting. And one of my quotes that I really like is, "Children will be what they see," to some degree, even though there are limitations to this idea. But we learn behavior partly through emulation and observation. What was something, like a story maybe you can share, of something you saw your father do that formed a belief of yourself that helped you?
So my parents had very traditional gender roles. My father was the
Good or
provider.
bad, right? Yes.
Yeah. Good or bad. My father was the provider. My mother was the homemaker mother. That was one, big thing I took growing up around that. My parents were both very actively involved in community and in charity. One of my earliest memories, my mother was part of a number of local community organizations, and one of them was a kosher meal service for people in hospital. And she would take me regularly before school. They would have a bunch of women would get together and prepare meals, and those would be frozen and then delivered to hospitals to be available for kosher patients. And she would take me before school, and I'd spend some time peeling vegetables. And my father was also very active. He was generous philanthropically, but he was also very active on committees. And that was something that I was exposed to from a young age. And my father in particular was very passionate about Jewish continuity because he had lost all of his family, all except one brother who lived in the US. And he formed the view that the key to Jewish continuity is Jewish day school education. And he invested heavily in both his time and his finances to support local Jewish education. And again, that was something that I took from him, the passion for Jewish continuity, and I sort of extend it to family continuity. The Jewish people, we've been around for a long time, we'll be around for a long time. And the Jewish story is a fantastic story. And continuing that is very much an imperative, and especially an imperative when you come from a situation of severe loss. To say, this family, my father came from a large family, and probably, I don't know, actually, dozens of cousins. And out of all that family, 2 people survived. So, my father said, I've got to rebuild. And he did. And we're a large family now. But not just rebuild something that maintains the values and the traditions that he was brought up with. And that's something that I very much carry within me. And when I think about what I do now with families, that's sort of on a micro scale. So you can think about as a people, we want continuity, but also individual family groups, helping them build something that has continuity is I guess something that I took from that.
That's fascinating. After the story that I stated earlier with the poisoning of my father, we had many goodbye meetings when he came to Germany. And when there's a sense of finality to it, you listen in a different sense if you think, for instance, that person will be there for you forever. And one of the things that he gave to me was not money, because many of our bank accounts were frozen because we didn't have a bank, but stories. And he would sit with me, and he could recall all the old Jewish stories that from the Old Testament in particular, that he would tell to me, and they were, even to this day, I think, like my moral background, and helped me to orientate myself in the world. They're some of the greatest treasures that were passed down to me. And what is the Jewish story, or like one story that your father told you, or that you got from that environment, that helped you to discover your own place in the world a little bit?
So we were brought up with a very strong Jewish tradition, Jewish day school education, which meant an Orthodox school, which means we're studying classical Jewish texts, the Bible, Talmud, and a lot of them are studied quite intensely. And we carry all of those stories, which are the stories of our people. My father, for many years, did not tell stories about his family. And that was common among Holocaust survivors because those stories were not good stories. And so we grew up knowing that he came from a family that was survivors, Holocaust survivors, and a lot of them were killed. but we didn't really know much detail. And what I took an interest, not having known, I went on a search for information. So after school, I went to study in Israel, and I met up some cousins. So we knew we had cousins scattered all over the place, and a couple of these cousins in Israel, and I would reach out to them and I'd say, tell me about the family history. And I developed an interest during teenagehood in genealogy and family trees. And I started drawing family trees, and I've got a file this thick of family tree notes from various people on both sides of the family to try and piece it together. And that was, I think, my way of trying to fill in these missing pieces of a puzzle that was my family. My family, there was a bit here and a bit here and a bit there. Connect this with this? And it was only much later, probably around the mid-80s, that my father took the decision that it was important for him to share these stories with us. And it was around the time a movie came out called Shoah by Claude Lanzmann. And this movie was about the Holocaust, and it went for 9 hours. And it was screened in Melbourne. So I've got to say to you that this is very important to know, that Australia had the highest Holocaust survivor population outside of Israel. That means that in my class in school, more than half of them were children of Holocaust survivors. It loomed very large in the community. It's very interesting because that was what you grew up in. If you grew up around that, then that's what you know. And you see other people who have that similar background. So they had a showing of this film, and we were all required to attend. And after that, my father decided, this is very important. You know what? It's painful for me to talk about it, but I need to talk about it because I need to tell these stories to my children so that they know. And he started doing it on a regular basis. We would actually have an annual dinner where he would tell stories, and that was to coincide with his liberation on the 11th of April, 1945, his liberation from Buchenwald concentration camp, by which time he was nearly dead, to the extent that it took him 4 years to convalesce. But we would have a family dinner, and he would tell stories. And he would say afterwards, he'd have nightmares from the stories. He knew that there was, it came at a cost telling these stories to us, but it was very important for him to tell them. And I recorded a lot of them and kept them for posterity. And, I guess one of the stories that particularly struck me was the story of his elder brother. Because he and my uncle who survived, they were number 2 and number 3 in the family. There were 6. The elder brother had a whole long story. And years later, I was able to close the loop around that story. And again, fill in pieces of the puzzle. So those stories, those Holocaust stories, were very important to us. And particularly for our cousins, who were the other branch who lived in New York, whenever my father would say something, they'd say, what did he say? What did he say? Tell us, because my uncle never said a word. My father was very optimistic and positive after the war. My uncle was bitter for the rest of his life. And so our cousins were, again, scrounging for information. What can you tell me? Anything, something. It's like, we grow up with a history, but we don't know what the history is. We know there is a history, but we have very little ability to find out details. And that was, again, what drove me to find out more about the family, about our journey. I have from one cousin of ours in Israel who was a politician. He drew me a document, and I have it in his handwriting, going back 7 generations, and roughly, the different branches of the family and where they ended up.
One of the things I have a great question about is, in between those who preserve their love for humanity and optimism and faith in those who succumb to bitterness and nihilism. What is a differentiator between those two people that you have noticed?
It's very interesting. I don't I can't purport to know how my father dealt with this, but he had, a long period of time after the war, 4 years, where he was in Switzerland convalescing, and he had some ups and some setbacks, and until he was healthy enough to travel. And he spent a lot of time reading, probably a lot of time feeling very sorry for himself. Um, Viktor Frankl said somebody who has a purpose can survive anything. And my father was very determined, that the determination to survive, and not just to survive, to rebuild. And I think he struggled with it every single day, and every day made a conscious decision not to allow himself to fall into, depression. He There was a group of people in Melbourne, known as the Buchenwald Boys, who had all been liberated from this concentration camp, and they had a bit of a club. And my father, for a time, was part of that club, and then decided after one particular meeting where I think he got quite drunk, that he didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. And again, I think it was a conscious decision on his part to say, no, when I'm hanging around with these people, I'm experiencing emotions that I don't want to, and I would rather not do that. So I'm going to stay away from this group, and I'm going to, in my own way, push myself forward. So on one hand, I guess that's a tribute to some internal strength on his part. But then you say, okay, that's a positive. The negative is it was, it became the culture in my family that we don't talk about bad things and we don't talk about emotions. We suppress bad emotions. And so you think about, what did I get from my family? A determination to build, to create, um, to innovate. I think that's something that I got from my father. But the other thing that was that we didn't even know what we didn't know. In our family, we don't talk about anything bad. And again, I've learned a lot in the past few years about this, and developed my own ability to talk about bad things and talk about things that are difficult to talk about. Um, and I'm very fortunate to have done that. But I can see that it came from a place where that was suppressed, which means I had an upbringing that was, I don't know, emotionally challenged. I don't know what PC term we might use for that. I can think of some other terms that are less complimentary.
There's so much to unpack from what you just shared. Thanks so much for doing that. And like for me personally, I could see a lot of, like, even Frankel at the end of his book speaks about that people who had left the camps, that some of them grew very bitter and felt betrayed by life itself. And there was always one thing. I think it was Elie Wiesel who wrote in his book about it. It was where some rabbis put God on trial in one of the concentration camps. Have you heard that story?
Yeah, yeah, I've heard stories like that, and there are these sorts of stories throughout Hasidic tradition as well, where something bad happens and the rabbis form a court, and they call God to judgment, and they say, what's going on? This is unfair. It's this whole problem of theodicy and
The crazy part for me
why.
about the story is like it's like they put God on trial and they came to the conclusion that what happened was clearly wrong, but then they went on to pray, and it's like
Exactly.
it's like
You know,
one of the, I think, like, it says so much about the Jewish tradition, faith in general. It's like saying yes to life in spite of everything. It's like one of the things Viktor Frankl also proposed. Yeah, very interesting. If you could like consult with one of your ancestors from back then, who would you pick and what would you ask them? Like if we would
Oh
find a
boy.
technology to have the family tree interactivize, then maybe we could back and forth and have, instead of me as a poor interviewer, you have one of your own ancestors that you can have a conversation with them.
Gee, that's difficult. I don't, I would have loved to have met my grandfather, my father's father. Um, I think I think I looked like him. We don't have photos of him. Um, and but whenever I used to cut my hair very short, my father would be very annoyed, and I think he didn't like that. So, but I'd love to know from him what life was like. I've heard it, from my father, bits of it, of what life was like in this small town in Poland. Because my grandfather was a businessman and my grandmother worked with him in the business, and they were, prominent within their community and well off and very generous as well. And sort of trying to, again, piece understand the environment that my father grew up in, and that helps me understand my father in the same way I understand myself through the environment I grew up in, because we are all, a product, a mix of nature and nurture, and the that household that we grew up in very much informs our values. So, there isn't any one question that I'd say, I wish I could ask him this. Um, but just to get to know him and to understand from his perspective what life was like, and some of the decisions he had to make, some very difficult decisions to do the best thing by his family in the most terrible of times.
You mentioned continuity, and it's a beautiful word. Do you feel that our generation is suffering from a disconnect to their ancestors and the values of old?
I'd have to say yes. Um, it's it's very interesting. The Jewish tradition, Jewish values are very much about respect for the previous generation and previous generations. And in Judaism, we have this notion that there is a decline, because in every generation we are further removed from the original revelation in Mount Sinai. And I think the contemporary world views things as the reverse, that in every subsequent generation we get better and we know more, and which is true. There are things that we know better now than we did in previous generations, and and therefore they have less respect for the past because of that. And I think that's, striking that balance. Every new generation does add something new to the knowledge base, the understanding of the previous generation. Every generation is brought up in a different context to the previous ones. Um, I'm politically conservative, and therefore I I feel that you've got to make a strong case to make a radical change to to how things are, to the status quo. Um, on the other hand, the other side of politics will pursue, at its extremes, change for change's sake. We've got to just pull everything down and rebuild it. So, yeah, I think there is a lack of respect for history, respect for previous generations, and the wisdom of the past, because there is so much wisdom there that we can tap into that's still very, very relevant to today.
On our way here, I went past Berlin is full with little ancestral artifacts that they still speak to you, both good and bad. Every corner here has a meaning, a message, and there's some philosopher or ideologue from the past who still has a statue or a quote or something like this going on. And one of the things I grew past is there's a little hole in the floor in front of a great palace where there's a glass where they have empty bookshelves, and it's a memorial for the books that the National Socialists burned back in the days to eradicate the history. You yourself, David, are an author. When did your journey of becoming a writer start? Because I feel writing a book in itself is a revolutionary act, so to say.
When did it start? So I said to you that I was very good at some subjects and not good at others in school. I was very good at maths and physics, and I was very bad at English. And I say it now almost as a badge of pride that I failed high school English. Uh, I did not like reading the books.
We can take a pause here. What is it now that you're a best-selling author? What would you tell to that particular English teacher who failed you, so to say?
I failed because I didn't put in the work. Okay, and we can keep running on this. I failed because I did not do the work. I didn't like the work. I didn't like reading the books. I didn't practice doing exams. I did the stuff that came easy to me, and this came hard. So what would I say to my English teacher back then? Or what do I say to my kids now? To say, what I'll say to them is that whatever you did in school does not define you. And the Australian school system now, the Victorian Certificate of Education, is an awful system, and it puts pressure on kids for 2 years to get some magic number that they think is going to be the key to their success. So to anybody who's gone through that system, I say, screw it. It doesn't define you. I failed English. I was very, very bad at writing and written expression back then. And now I'm an accomplished writer and author. So the biggest lesson for me is that you can reinvent yourself. You could learn new skills and develop things at any stage in life. And that's the most important thing to know. It's that growth mindset. So if you want to know my journey as an author, it started with a chip on my shoulder for having failed English.
Have you read by any chance Laszlo Polgar's Bring Up Genius, or do you know of the story of the Polgar family?
I've heard of it. I've heard of it. I've not read it, and I'm actually not a big reader of books these days. I actually prefer to consume articles because it's just more efficient. I mean, I'm not a quick reader, but I'm thirsty for information, and a book would take me, a non-fiction book would take me a long time. Actually, a fiction book would take me a long time too. And so I don't read a lot of books. I do read a lot of summaries. I do read a real lot of articles. Every week I probably read probably one book worth of articles. Maybe in terms of volume. I don't know if you want to know more about my journey that led me to write a book.
Let me pick up on something before that. So Polgar was an interesting person. Like Polgar looked at all the geniuses from history, the people who really excelled at their craft. Like I think he looked at Bach and at some of the Da Vinci and all these things. And one of the things that he found was his thesis would geniuses are not born, they're raised through a particular form. And one of the things he mentioned was the environment in early childhood specialization. And to test his thesis, he, in romantic manner, like wrote, I think, in a newspaper that he was looking for a wife to test this. And then he found Clara, and they picked chess as a discipline to test this experience that they can create a genius on purpose. And they had two beautiful daughters, and they kind of redesigned their entire environment, put chess posters and books everywhere, and taught them chess from an early age. And by the time they were 12, they were some of the best chess players in the world. And he fought the education system in great many ways. My question for you is, you grew up in a business family. Do you feel that you've been early childhood specialized in the craft that you are still to this day are engaging in, which is like wealth advisory and success management, all these kind of things, and entrepreneurial excellence?
I don't think so. First of all, that story, it reminds me of the Williams girls, whose father raised them to be tennis champions from a young age and was successful. Um, my parents weren't like that. However, they were very, what's the word? Pushy, demanding, um, had high expectations. We grew up with very high expectations from our parents, and um, and they were very critical. Nothing but the best was good enough. You know, the story I've told a zillion times is when I came home one day with 93% on a maths test, and my mother said, "What happened to the other 7 marks?" And not well done, but why aren't you better? So that was the message. The message from my parents are, you can achieve anything. You're really good. Achieve better, but keep achieving better. Not whatever you do. So again, it's a mixed message. The message is you are capable of great things, but what you're doing now isn't good enough. You need to be better. Rather than saying whatever you are is good. We love you as you are. The message was, we want you to be better. And I guess that instilled with me a desire to be an overachiever, I guess. I don't know. Um, it's something I've been working on for a number of years, reconciling all of those emotions of, but I'm driven to succeed, and but also there are some things where I felt failure was not an option. Um, you know, in entrepreneurship, sometimes they say fail fast. You know, try something, it doesn't work, fail, try again. For me, in my business, I felt failure was not an option because failure would be failure. That would be, no, that's not good enough. That's just defeat. Um, and something that couldn't be countenanced. And in a way, that was something that drove me forward to say, I can't fail. I cannot fail. Therefore, I must succeed, and I will continue until I do succeed.
One of my favorite questions is from a quote is from Carl Jung. He said, the most important question everybody can ask themselves is, what myth am I living? And it's very interesting for me. Like currently I'm to the platform I'm building, I have to design system instructions for AI assistants that I'm building, which reminds me a lot of the belief systems that are governing us, so I can interact as the basis properly. What for you was an early programmer that helped you to create your story that you are still living in, so to say?
I'm a big fan of Jung, and in particular, the most important thing that I take from him is the need for individuation. Um, in order to for a child to grow up. And when you're in a family, the family subsumes everything, and it can be hard to become your own person. And that's been my personal challenge for a lot of my life, because in our community we were a prominent family, and I was, from a very young age, judged by my surname, by family name. People knew my family and therefore made assumptions about me. Um, and that meant that they didn't see me for me. They saw me as, oh, you're just part of that family. And that was, again, something that drove me to say, how can I be me? How can I make my own personal mark in the world as an individual, rather than be the son of or part of this family? And that, again, is Jungian individuation. I'm not sure if I've answered your question at all.
You've answered your question. You took the myth of a question and somehow distilled the meaning of it, because it's like, I feel like when you have a surname that means something is, for instance, Polgar, one of the things that he found in the creation of a genius is that they were all being trusted a vision that came along with expectations. It's a story. They were being told you are like a great example for this is the mother of Alexander the Great. She told Alexander, "You're the son of Zeus." And for instance, so you're ought you're destined to conquer the world. And it's I feel like in an extreme sense, one of the things I found with very uh, people who've made great contributions is that there's been some force that has been both good and negative for that particular child, where this sense of expectation was installed within them, and where they it's both serving them, but also where they have to break out at some point. How do you feel you found your individuality and made your own strivings towards being a person rather than just carrying on family traditions, so to say? Because I feel that that's people struggle with that, like the idea of like honoring the past and doing what the ancestors doing and finding their own way to be a colorful individual to do their own thing and dismiss that a little bit.
Yes. So it started, as I said, grew up around the family business, went to finish school, did some further study, then went to university. While I'm at university in Melbourne, I'm working part-time for the family business. And by the end of that degree, I decided that I did not want to join the family business. It was open to me if I wanted. I had three family members, brother, brother-in-law, cousin, all in the business and well established there. All of them were 10 plus years older than me. So I'm half a generation younger and very self-conscious in the business. What do they think? How am I going to find my place? How am I going to get in there and have a role that I can make my own and not step on each other's toes and that sort of thing? And I decided then, not for me. I wanted to get a job on my own merits. Um, After finishing my degree, I had an offer to do honors. My mother said, you should do honors. But I hunted through the job ads in the newspaper and saw a job and says, this looks interesting. Software. I was good at maths and stats and computers. Software development job for a stockbroking firm. Applied for the job, got the job. First job I applied for, full-time job. And I said, I've got to do this. That was, I guess, the first radical step I took. But then, after working there for a few years, first as a developer and then as a quant analyst in the research department, I actually felt uncomfortable with this whole notion of a 9 to 5 job, of being an employee. Because again, I came from this environment where of business ownership. You know, you're a business person, not an employee. That wasn't the path for me. The obvious path for me was business ownership. But hang on, I had chosen not to join the family business. So what does that mean? Well, the other option is start my own business. So that's what I did. And that's what I now call my second career, where I started a business and ended up starting 3 businesses and partnering in a couple of others and a bunch of things. So again, I've taken that business entrepreneurship environment that I grew up in, but rather than being part of somebody else's entrepreneurial story, I created my own entrepreneurial story. And many years later, I met a gentleman by the name of Jay Hughes, who is a well-known thought leader in the space of family office. And I think, some people call him the father of family office. And I was at one of his webinars, and he's since become a good friend. And he was saying he had a client, and the client was in their 50s, the son of the founder. And he said this client was a custodian of somebody else's dream rather than a creator of his own dreams. And when he said that, I had a penny drop moment, and I suddenly made sense of everything I had previously done in my entire career. I realized that this is exactly what I was wanted. I did not want to be a custodian of somebody else's dream. I wanted to be a creator of my own dreams. And that was why I didn't join the family business. I got a job off my own bat. I started my own businesses, etc., etc., etc. All of that suddenly said, aha, now I get it. This is why I was driven to do this. And again, this goes back to Jungian individuation, the desire to be my own person.
Jung believed that that human beings have fundamentally two stories. It's the Oedipal myth. It's the boy or the woman that never grows up and finds their own path, and I think he called it the Siegfried myth, like the hero, so to say, who leaves the known behind to go on his own adventure. Do you believe this was an anti-Oedipal moment for you, so to say, where um, you liberated yourself from the story that was imposed on you and said, no, life is too short. I want to be a protagonist and not a side character in my own myth.
Yeah, I would say so. And I'm still liberating myself. So for me it's an ongoing journey because again, the first stage was, and I think of it now in hindsight, there's three careers. One, employee, two, entrepreneur, three, advisor. And each one was a step forward again in becoming my own person. The interesting thing about my choice of career now to work with family enterprise is that what I've done is I've done a bit of jujitsu on my own family background to say I'm taken all that lived experience as a member of a family and said, how can I take that and use that to help other families on their journey?
One of the things I like from the old stories, also, David, is, for instance, from the story of Moses, is then when the Israelites leave the reign of the Pharaoh behind, before they come to the promised land, there's a desert of many generations of going through hardship. When you transitioned from one chapter to another, what were some of the moments where you couldn't quite capture the new identity and went through some personal hardship? When you think back of your journey, what were some of the moments where you were tested for your own choices to make your own way? Any particular failure stories or hard moments that came to mind when you think of these transition things?
So in terms of the transitions, first of all, there's overlap, heavy overlap. So I didn't stop doing one thing and start doing another. I had started a business while I was still full-time employed. And at some point decided, okay, I'm going to take the leap and leave employment and focus fully on that nascent business. And then more recently, I've spent some 10 years laying building this career as an advisor and an author, in parallel with one of my businesses where I had got that business to the point where it didn't need that much of my time. So I'm very much a believer in making sure that you know that you've got your next chapter written before you close the current chapter. That's the first thing I want to say. But in answer to your question, I had a habit of taking on a lot of things at one time. As I said, had three businesses, two partnerships, and they were all happening in parallel for a time. In addition to that, I had a handful of non-profit director roles, and business had its usual ups and downs. And there was a period where I a whole lot happened at once. And I was diagnosed with a very rare autoimmune disorder. And the prognosis for most people who have this is to end up wheelchair bound. It doesn't kill you. You don't die from it, you die with it, but not a very good quality of life. And that was a huge shock to me. The diagnostic process itself was quite challenging because it's difficult to diagnose, and one of the differentials is very insidious. Um, the diagnostic process was painful, but it was a huge shock to the system because I had all of this going on and I had all this in my head. Wow, I'm going to have a fantastic future. And suddenly I was confronted with this. And the treatment for this was very unpleasant, and I had side effects from it, and it really took everything out of me. Um, every time I had treatment, I would get terrible headaches, and I was just unable to do anything. And even the treatment was infusions, and I hated needles, and I'm sitting there in a hospital ward full of other people for several hours with a needle in me, and just feeling sorry for myself and watching uh, TV to occupy myself. But it was a pretty dark time in my life, and it's a whole story how I sort of got through it. But it's one of these conditions that Western medicine does not is not very helpful. When your doctor says to you, "We don't know what causes this. There's no known cure. Here's the frontline treatment. It works until it stops working. After that, we consider some other treatments that have some serious side effects as well." And I had side effects to the frontline treatment. And I'm thinking, fuck. I don't know what your policy is on language here, but I'll say it anyway.
Curse as much as you want.
Thank you. Um, this is what my life is going to look like. I had dreams of, and I felt pretty sorry for myself for a long time. And I sort of felt, well, I realized that I couldn't be doing everything that I wanted to do, certainly not all at once. And I started, well, I had to do less. I couldn't work the long hours that I used to work. Um, that was one thing I learned fairly quickly. But then I built a sort of mental model um, that I published some years later around time and purpose. What should I do? I thought I would continue to be very active in operating business and be able to do all these things at once, and I couldn't. So I started consolidating a little bit, um, making some changes in some of the businesses. I got out of a couple of the businesses. One of the business failed. The other business, one of the partnerships failed, which was also a big disaster from day one, actually. Um, and the other businesses I was able to sell out to the partners, and that was okay. But made some changes in the business. But when I look back at that, I think it took me 10 years to fully recover. So to physically recover to the point where I could be productive again and positive, that took probably 2, 3 years. But it left me in the doldrums for, I think, a total of something like 10 years before I started turning around. My main business was flat for a number of years. And then we started turning things around and going into a growth cycle again. And then I started getting involved in some of the work I'm doing now. But I guess my point is that it came from a place of real challenge and a very dark place for me emotionally. And I didn't have a lot of people to talk to about this. I wrote a lot about it, but I didn't write it. It was just sort of like a journal, and that helped me process what I was feeling. And now the condition is, well, as I said, Western medicine failed me. It was actually acupuncture, not the first time, but the second time, and learning how to breathe and learning how to listen to my body and look after myself that really enabled me to turn it around. And now, the condition is effectively in remission. At the same time, I'm not going to shout from the rooftops that I beat it because I don't know. I don't know how. All I know is that I'm in a better place now than I was. And as a result, I'm I spend more time looking after myself. Um, and I spend time listening and attuned to my body in ways that I wasn't before. Before, I would just take on more things and more things and more things and have so many things on my plate and be multitasking and working 6 days a week and very long hours. And I realized that it was unsustainable. Well, I realized my body told me it was unsustainable. And and that was how I shifted into a more positive outlook about what I can be do. I changed my expectations about what the future might bring, and fortunately, I'm now in a much better place for it.
One of my favorite words is the word rabbi. I think it means teacher, translated. If you could travel maybe back in time or to somebody who just got that diagnosis, that what you just described as a traumatic event, because trauma is whenever a belief system or a story is collapsing and we have to reorientate ourselves. And you, just like my father had a visitation, they would have a visitation from David Werdiger. What would you tell them or hand over to them in order to aid them on their struggle or to help them survive the chapter of adversity that is in front of them?
The biggest lesson for me was the need to look after myself before I look after others, because I naturally want to help others. That's, as a parent, or in general, I, my default mode is problem-solving mode. I'm not necessarily empathetic. I rather say, how can I help? So if somebody's got a problem, I jump to a solution. What is the solution? Um, so, um, but my ability to do that is only as good as my ability to. I can only help others if I'm in a good shape myself. So I say to people, look after yourself, number one. If you don't look after yourself, you won't be in a position to look after others. And unfortunately, I've had a number of friends of mine who dropped dead in their 50s, and they weren't necessarily the picture of perfect health. So I'm very focused on the need to um, maintain good, health and well-being, both physical and emotional well-being, to make sure that you can be there for a long time, hopefully, that you can't control, um, but also to be able to be there for others.
Your relationship with money, where does it come from and what's it like?
It's complicated. I grew up spoiled. I grew up having everything I need. I didn't necessarily learn from a young age to be resilient. Um, some people, I grew up knowing that we were wealthy, knowing that at some point in the future I would inherit. Um, so I haven't yet fully understood my relationship with money. I'm ambitious. I don't like to spend a lot. I like to spend well. And I like to invest and think long term. Um, but I do, my parents never taught me. I shouldn't necessarily, well, I could put it on them if I wanted. My parents didn't necessarily teach me to be, to be good with money, or to be to work. Oh, gee, I don't know how to put it. But I like to give my kids a better money education than I got. Maybe that's the way to put it. I don't think I got a good And here's the thing, my siblings, they grew up in a family that was becoming wealthy. I grew up in a family that already was wealthy. And that's a function of difference in age between children and the way the family was evolving. So I think I've got a different money story to my older siblings. Um, you know, you might call me entitled. I don't know what entitled. Entitled is a pretty um, unpleasant word used to describe people or nepo babies. Um, but I was determined to achieve what I could on my own. Nevertheless, I was very fortunate to have parents who were there as a safety net and there to help me when I needed it. So I was never thrown in the deep end and say, just work it out for yourself. I don't know if that's a good idea anyway, to do that to a child when the family has the capacity to help. Um, but if they'd done that, maybe I would have taken a different path. Maybe I would have given up on my business at some stage when it wasn't doing well and just got a job. Um, so I'm very fortunate that my parents were there for me to support what I was doing financially and to make sure that it didn't all fall in a heap. They say some businesses that some people say any business will survive if it survives long enough. If it can stay open. A lot of businesses will just run out of cash, run out of oxygen, and then just have to close down. But if they can stay around long enough, they will eventually succeed. And uh, my business might have a little bit of that. I was able to keep going through a mix of my personal determination and help from the family to keep things going until it eventually succeeded.
I was yesterday in a museum, David, and it was Berlin has the most wonderful museums from many places I've been to, and I was deeply inspired by some of the people who went on to treasure hunts to find these artifacts. And the person I was with, she said something beautiful. She said, like, I wonder how these guys financed it. Like, and it was like one of the things that I struggle with right now is like sitting down with people and winning that internal battle that you need to win before you make an ask to somebody. Like emotions that come up for me are guilt, shame, the need for autonomy. You're also somebody where it was very important for you to be independent. How did you get over the hump of I want to do everything yourself and arriving at a conclusion that collaboration with others, both on the financing sector, is something that is necessary? Not sure if that question makes sense to you.
I I, I think it does. I um so in the relatively early days of my business, I had I was first of all I was inspired by two books. One was Rich Dad Poor Dad, and the other one was The E-Myth. And from those books, I understood first of all the difference between owning a job and owning a business. Second of all, the importance of business systems. Now, my wife, she's from the US. She came here to meet me, or we met here, we married here, we settled here, and and that meant that we would visit her family regularly in the US. Now, the question is, how do you do that as a business owner? And my father, every time I'd go overseas, I'd say, I'm going overseas. He says, how can you leave the business? How can you leave the business? And what happened was I turned that around, and one of the metrics of success in the business was my ability to not be there. Can I get away from the business? So first of all, you're going overseas and you're getting by anyway because, email and whatever else you needed to do to run the business from far away back then, which was harder than it is now. But the other thing was that those were markers for me. When can I travel? Can I travel at certain, how long can I get away for and do a trip to visit family in the US? Can I do it at any time? Can I do it for a week? Can I do it for 2 weeks? Can I do it at the busy time of the month? That was the first thing. The second thing, so the second thing was I was talking to a prospect and trying to sell him on our service. And he said to me, look, this is all very good, but what happens if you get hit by a bus? And in my head, I said, oh shit, he's right. And I think I said it to him too. I said, well, I'd be dead, but that could be a real issue. And I went home and I thought, well, I mean, now I'd use the term key person risk. I realized that this business is not a business because it's too dependent on me. And after that, I was more determined than ever to say, how can I build something that's a real business? The only way I can build it is if it doesn't need me. And there was another juncture in the business where I was looking for a growth path, and I had decided, so I was the architect of the business, and I was the everything of the business. I was a key person. And I thought, how am I going to grow this business? I loved writing code and architecting things and building things. That was my comfort zone. But also, a necessary evil is you've got to get customers. And I didn't like that so much, the getting customers part, because I'm not a salesperson. So I thought, okay, how am I going to grow this business? Well, I'll find somebody who's got a very good business development background, and I will invite them to partner in the business, and they can help grow the business as an equity partner. So I went around to my network, and I eventually stumbled across somebody who fit the perfect profile, had previously exited a business, so he was a business owner, had a very strong sales and biz dev background. And we reached an agreement that he would spend 3 months in the business, just sitting there analyzing the business and understanding the industry. And after that, he would form a view as to how we might partner. At the end of 3 months, he said to me 2 things. He said, first of all, I don't want to be a partner in this business. I want to start a business that's a customer of this business, because he thought there's more money in that. Okay, fair enough. But the other thing he said was more important to me. The other thing he said was, you should not hire a biz dev person. The best biz dev person for the business is you. You should hire an operations manager. And that was one of the best pieces of advice I had in business, because I took that advice and I hired an operations manager, and I went out there out of my comfort zone, and I went out there selling and dredging up business. And I didn't like it. It didn't come naturally for me, but I did it and I was okay at it. But what it meant was that the business operationally started to have some management to run the day-to-day. And that operations manager, when they left, we hired the next one. She was more senior. And then the next one, she was operations manager, but then she became general manager. And then eventually we set up an advisory board, and she became CEO, but not for very long because she wasn't good at that. But we had another CEO, and that was a very good relationship. And all of this was this journey of turning the business into something that didn't need me, because it's only a business if it's worth something to somebody else. And if it's not worth anything without me, then it's not worth anything. It may generate cash, but it's not something that you can go away for a few months and do something else. And the other thing that I did in the business was I developed a recurring revenue business model, which was really important too. So, once I discovered that, which was with the help of a customer or wannabe customer, I decided that my goal was to make more money while I was asleep than when I was awake. So essentially, to have the business be an engine of passive income, and again, not need me. And I sold the business just a few weeks ago. And By that time, I was only spending about 10% of my time in the business, and I was spending the rest of my time doing my family advisory and other projects. And I was having discussions with the owners, what are you going to do next? And I said, if you want me involved, I can be involved in some sort of advisory capacity. Um, and then I get a phone call as we're reaching the conclusion of things, and I'm thinking, is he going to offer me some sort of role? And he said, just want to say it's been a pleasure meeting you. Thanks very much. And I said, oh, I didn't say it. I just, okay, that was very nice. And I thought afterwards, what? They don't want me. So I felt a little bit unwanted. And then I reflected on that and I thought, hang on, but this is exactly what my goal was. My goal was that I sold this business and this business did not need me anymore. Tick, win. That's exactly what I wanted to achieve, and I achieved it with that business. And as part of the exit, okay, now my time is free to do whatever else I want to do, or more of what I'm doing already. I've forgotten the actual question, but I think I might have answered it.
This was a beautiful transition, actually, and it's also interesting to see at what point it's not only the business not needing you, but what happens so you don't need the business anymore. Because for me, for instance, it's my life's work that I'm currently working on, and it's you know my story a little bit. We are building Alexandrian, which is like the new Alexandrian library to talk to your ancestors and to strive towards psychological mortality. But it has a cathartic effect on me also to deal with the grief, the imminent death of my father, and the idea of not being needed in this enterprise also leaves me without a function that gets me out of bed in the morning. How did you get over the fact of stepping away from it? Because I feel that's the theme that we covered earlier, leaving the Oedipal elements of your life behind. And I'm feeling a little bit like a father, where it's like you should at some point, the child should have its own journey rather than you living through your child, if that's a fair comparison to make.
See, here's the thing. In working with family business and with owner-led businesses, okay, I work with them on governance, on systematization, on succession. And I say to them over and over, if your business is everything, then what are you without your business? I say to them, starting a business is like having a child. When you start a business, think about the parallels. Having a child is an act of creation. Starting a business is an act of creation. When your child is in its infancy, it wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning screaming. When your business is in its infancy, it does the same. Eventually, your business grows up, but your biological children and your business children, so to speak, they compete for your attention. Your children compete for your attention. Your biological children and your business child competes for your attention. Your business eventually grows up and matures, hopefully, and it takes on a life of its own, hopefully. And at some point, you say, take your wings, go, fly. Your adult child leaves the home. Okay, and I've got adult children and they've left the home and married and started families of their own. And when that happens, you have mixed feelings. Your baby's going. Your baby's all grown up. Where is this little child I carried? But at the same time, you're immensely happy for them because you see that you've done something right. You've raised them up to be good kids, and they're now adults and creating their own families, and that's family continuity, cultural continuity. And it's the same in business. You start a business. The business is an embodiment of your values, the team, the people you hire around you. You have a culture. But eventually, the nature of organizational culture is that, the whole monkey organizational culture thing where they train to not climb up the ladder and then they rotate the monkeys out and eventually none of the original monkeys are there, but the behavior still stays. That's the nature of organizational culture and any group culture. So it's like that. It's like that in a business. So I've been preaching this for years to clients, and now that I've recently exited this business, I've got to eat my own dog food. I've got to say, yeah, um, everything that I do with clients is rooted in my lived experience, whether it's a family member, as a business owner, all of these things. So if I'm not doing it myself, then how can I be telling others to do it?
I had a, since we are cursing, I lost my shit 2 months ago, a little bit in a way. I was like uh, trying to figure out how to finance Alexandrian, and I was frustrated by the conversation with venture capitalists I had. They wanted to have a 4-year exit plan. I'm like, I'm building something for eternity. How can you even like throw it into the room of thinking such manner? We need to safeguard the stars of our ancestors forever. And I was really frustrated. And I had a conversation with my father, and he always tells me the old stories. And he asked me the question, how do you think King Solomon financed the build of the temple? And that was very inspiring for me to think about that. Many of the greatest accomplishments of mankind have been financed in creative ways that are not based on that model. How would you answer this question of how do you build something that survives generation without taking the hard-earned money, so to say, of venture capitalists at this stage?
Okay. So here's the thing about venture capital and the startup industry. Okay. That industry is not about building businesses to last. It's about building businesses to exit. As soon as a venture fund, a venture investor puts money in a business, the clock is ticking on the exit. What that exit looks like, whether it's a trade sale or an IPO, it doesn't mean the business closes down, but it means that as an owner, the VC investor is not there to own for the long term. Why? Because the VC funding model is based on closed funds. So the venture fund has 8 + 2 years. Okay. They have a 4-year investment period. They have a 4-year harvest period that might extend a little bit. And after that, hopefully, all of the original money plus more is returned to the investors, and they get capital returns and they work out what they want to do next. That closed fund model, I don't know who invented it, but that is what drives industry behavior. You get some founders who say, oh, I want to start a business. What should I start? Here's their thinking. Their thinking isn't, oh, here's a problem that's bothering me and I want to solve it. No, their thinking is, what sort of company might Google want to buy that Google can't develop themselves? That's the
It's
thinking.
the question in I understand it. People, okay, I continue, please. I interrupted you. I just had an aha moment where I may understand the current scene, which I had. The nature of the questions that they are asking that fuels their very venture is driven by the current ecosystem that they are operating off. Because for me, the
Yes.
question that I want to answer is like how can we talk to the dead and preserve wisdom and consciousness itself? And that's like led me to this conundrum of like, I don't really feel like where I feel extremely frustrated by a lot of the conversation that I was having, because I felt betrayed by their unwillingness to work on something that maybe even outlasted them. And now I feel like I've been the naive person because I didn't understand their business model very well. And I've had some very strange conversations over the last couple of weeks where maybe I need to work a little bit on that. If you and King Solomon would be in a room,
It's
what
very
would you
funny.
ask? What would you ask him?
I just realized, so Daniel, you want to bring dead people back to life. They want to do 10x their money.
It was very strange conversations, and it was like, and I'm sure they also thought that I met this weirdo. It was like he was an idiot, and I was like, you're such an unromantic. Why are you speaking only about money? I was like, maybe I'm in the wrong room with the wrong kind of people at this point, and maybe there's another way about it. What advice would you give me in regards to how to build something for eternity rather than an exit?
Okay. So the fact that you're building for an exit doesn't mean that the company dies. Okay. But it does mean that the original investors get their money back and more, and the business will grow after that because nobody buys a business unless it's got more potential to grow. Otherwise, why would they buy it? If you pay X for a business, then you need to it needs to be worth to you more than X. So you can be building something for the long term. You can build a business that has some, that has a very long-term vision, but your investors need to be able to, in order to put their money in, they've got to get a line of sight to an exit that they can get their money back. You can continue to be in the business for a long time. Maybe the exit is you buying them out. I don't know. But that's if you want investors who are buying from a closed fund, that's what comes with the territory. If, on the other hand, you go to another group of investors who are buy and hold investors, you might find a greater alignment because they might say, well, we like what you're doing. We're inspired by the mission of your business, and we want to invest in that business not to exit it, but so that one day that business will be profitable and pay us dividends, and we'll just hold it. And there are, now we're sort of going from venture investment from VC closed fund investment to family office investments, because the fund model works very well for the people who want that fund model, but some family office investors don't care for that. They don't want in 6 to 10 years to have a hunk of cash back and then work out, well, what am I going to do with this? I've got to find another fund and invest it again and again and again. Hang on, but this is a good business. Why can't I just hold on to it? But that is the minority of venture investors and private equity investors who say, oh, this is a good business. I'm just going to hold on to it for 20 years or 30 years or forever. Those investors are a lot harder to find, unfortunately. But so what do I say to you? Either design this business so that it delivers, or that it has the potential to deliver what your investors want, or if it doesn't, maybe it doesn't, then find a different set of investors who are aligned with investing in a business with a different time frame. It still needs to become a sustainable business for those investors, but they're not exit focused the way closed funds are exit focused.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. You mentioned also that your father did some continuity in investments with non-profit in a way. I'm very fascinated for how OpenAI is set up. I think, like, have you looked at their finance model from the beginning? What's your take on that?
OpenAI, it started as a non-profit, and I'm not sure at what point they decided to develop a for-profit part of that. Maybe because they realized that this is, could make too much money for us to let it sit in a non-profit. It's too profitable. I don't know, I've spent a lot of time in the non-profit world as a in a number of organizations as a director and committee member, and my experience with non-profits taught me a lot about families, because families and non-profits have a lot in common. Both of them have a longevity. Families, if you consider a family member, okay, there was people before them, and quite possibly there'll be people after them. And they are, in the lifetime of the family, they are just one little section. A lot of non-profits are like that as well. I was director, had a number of roles at a non-profit for 20 years all up. And they are 130 years old now, or something like that, maybe more. And when you're sitting there at the board table and on the wall is all these pictures of presidents and from past presidents going back to 18 whatever, it's a bit humbling because you get the feeling that this is not about you. This is about you being in a very fortunate position to be sitting as one of the people responsible for this organization at this period of time. And your job is to come in here and to leave there and make sure it's better than it was and that you leave it in better shape than you found it. So families, non-profits, they're about the collective. They're about something that's bigger than any individual. When non-profits start to be too much about one individual, and families for that matter, that's when they lose what makes them great. So, when a non-profit like OpenAI that started with a mission suddenly becomes, realizes that this is potentially very profitable and changes its business model or changes its structure, then maybe it can't be as effective as a non-profit because it's lost some of that. The word altruism has come into me, but I don't know, it's purpose. It loses purpose. So, if you want to start a company, the company has a purpose. It might be to solve a problem. It might be to bring dead people's wisdom, make the wisdom of dead people accessible, and preserve it in perpetuity. Okay, it's a noble mission. To be a company, it has to have a commercial model in order to get happening. It has to reach scale to get happening. These days there's social enterprise who sort of combine the two, but there's no reason why companies can't have noble missions. Some companies' missions are more noble than others. I don't know if I'm thinking about a cigarette company. Doesn't necessarily have a noble mission.
Yeah.
Cigarettes, chocolates, alcohol, all the things that are really good for you. What is our mission? Okay. What's your mission at Mars Confectionery? To make the most delicious chocolates. Some companies really get the whole mission thing wrong and they end up with this motherhood bullshit on the wall that everybody knows is nonsense.
Yeah, it's best regards from Cameron, by the way. He played in, I think, Better Stop Smoking. There's a famous movie between that he plays in that widely is responsible why many people now know that tobacco industries don't have our best interest in mind, and he actually played as a child, and it's best regards to him. What is you're working with ultra high net worth individuals? What is an ultra high net worth individual, and what have you learned from working with them?
People ask me how. So the industry itself questions what is the definition of high net wealth, ultra high net wealth, the 1%ers, the 0.1%ers. And people usually say, well, if you've got X million dollars, then you are ultra high net worth, not high net wealth. Okay. I don't put numbers on it. The families I work with have generational wealth. And by generational wealth, I mean enough for multiple generations. The way I define that is not with a number, but rather a factor of how much cash the business is generating or the assets are generating versus what it's consuming. So if the business is generating more money than it needs, if the family wealth, is generating more than it needs, then it's generative. It's generational. It can be there for a long time. If the family is wealth is generating a lot of money, but they are living such a high lifestyle that it's not sustainable, that's not necessarily generational wealth. So that's just from a definitional perspective. So that's how I define them. I work with families who have way more than they need, more than enough for their children and their children's children. And what do I help them do? I help them manage those generational transitions where they go, well, the current generation, and I call that the incumbent generation, we're getting to the point where we don't need to do what we do anymore. We want to move to something that they might call retirement, or we might use far better words like that than like elder. And their children and perhaps their grandchildren are of an age where they're saying, okay, we want to get involved in the family enterprise, whatever that means. And it might be an operating business, it might be a family office. And I help those families manage this. And the way I do it is using a methodology that is values-based. So I'll give you an example of a nonprofit. Okay, so I was on the board of this nonprofit and we merged. And one of the things I was tasked to do was to articulate our values and to make sure we were a values-driven organization. So a nonprofit, it makes sense that a nonprofit have values because that's its purpose. Its purpose is to achieve some social good in the world. Okay? Companies, you can argue their purpose is maximize shareholder value or maximize stakeholder value. Okay, forget companies for now. Families, on the other hand, may or may not have values. Actually, no, sorry, I'll correct myself. They may not have articulated values and purpose, but they have values because everybody has values. We may not be aware of what our values are, but our values are the things we grew up with from our family, from the world around us. And the nature of people are that we are a mix of those two influences of our environment and our families. And families are a collective of different people of different ages and different generations. So the family values may be a set of values, and the external values would be different between the parents and the children. So I work with families who choose to take a values-driven approach to family continuity, and I help them articulate their individual and shared values and use that as a foundation to say, what do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? What is our purpose as a family? And use that as a foundation for their family continuity. That's, I guess, the big aspiration for the way I like to work with families. I also help families solve problems. Problems like how do I get my kids in shape to join the business? Or my kid wants to take over the business, or solve a problem like my kid doesn't want to take over the business. Every problem has two sides. Some people say, oh, I've got a problem. My kid's too ambitious, or my kid's not ambitious enough. So families have all sorts of problems, and they have all sorts of complexities arising from wealth and all the stuff that comes with it. And so I help the families navigate that in a variety of roles. But what I'm most passionate about is, as I said, that family continuity driven by shared values and purpose.
We spoke about Mount Zion in the beginning. Like you said that where if you would come back from Mount Zion with 10 commandments of wealth that you feel family officers and people who want to preserve what they have for generations, what would be those 10 commandments for wealth be like? Very clickbaity answer, but it just came to
that
me.
Is, yeah, 10 commandments of wealth. I'm not going to answer the question. because it's too hard and I'd have to think about it and try to articulate them. But I'll give you some of my guiding principles. Okay. I liken a family. If you want to build a family that lasts for a long time, you're building a castle. Okay, a castle is a nice way to think of it. And what does a castle need if it's going to last for a long time? It needs a strong foundation. And when I think about the foundation of a castle, a family that is a castle, that foundation has 3 layers. The first layer is communication. So commandment number 1, communicate well. Commandment number 2, once you establish how to communicate and that you communicate, and that's a whole thing unto itself, the next layer of the foundation is, as I shared values and purpose. Answer the question, why? Why are we together as a family? Okay? We happen to share some genetic material. We happen to have grown up together. We happen to be blessed with wealth. What does it mean? What's the purpose of it all? And if the family chooses to say, we want to be driven by our values to create something that can last a long time and make an impact on our family and the world around us, then the next layer is about what's called governance. We establish the rules by which the family operates and makes decisions, how it collaborates, its policies and all of that. So you might call them the first 3 commandments. 4th commandment, find the appropriate balance between the individual and the collective. And, we were talking earlier about society and, what we've lost. Respect for the past versus looking to the future. The family versus the individual. These are tensions that we have to navigate. And the answer is never one or the other. It's that sometimes it can be a tightrope in between them. And sometimes you can just find, that healthy balance. How much do we give our children? How do we raise our children to have a healthy attitude to money and to be responsible stewards of the family wealth? How do we teach them to live productive lives? How do we help them make sure that the family brand, the family name is positive for them rather than a burden or a source of judgment for them? So that's commandment number 4. Find that happy medium between the collective and the individual. Commandment number 5. I won't say commandment, rule number 5. There's no right or wrong. There's only consequences. How should we do this? Should we do this? Should we do this? 1, it's the family's decision. My purpose is to serve the family and to help them make good decisions. 2, there's no right or wrong answer. But let's think about the consequences. I want to do this. Okay, well, how might that play out? Let's work that through. Run the scenario. Commandment number, are we up to 5, 6? I don't know. 6. It's about rules. So families, they do these things called a family charter or a family constitution. And it's a document, So when you think about Moses coming down from the mountain with the 10 tablets, in some families, these documents are either written by patriarchs and matriarchs saying these are the rules for our family, or worse, they're written by lawyers instructed by patriarchs and matriarchs, in which case they are there to restrict and constrain. And when rules are set in that way, it doesn't necessarily work out well. More importantly, it can have negative consequences. In any rule-based system, okay, laws. What do you do with a law? Well, you've either got to obey the law or work within the law. Let's say the taxation system, okay? You've got to pay taxes. What if you don't want to pay taxes? You go to a good tax lawyer and they find a way to not pay taxes. So the nature of any rule-based system that is imposed on people, not necessarily with their consent, is that people will do whatever they can to work around those laws and subvert those laws. On the other hand, the most powerful rules are rules that are there by consensus, not by law. So in a family, if a family wants to create rules that will stand by the family, that are reasonable for the family, then those rules need to be rules by consensus. Those rules need to be determined through discussions within the family itself and debates within the family. Why are we doing this? What is the policy for this? What's the policy for that? What are the pros? What are the cons, etc., etc. Until the end result is that you have a document, this charter or constitution, that has these rules, these policies by which the family operates. And those who participated in that process can say, that's my rule. I made that rule. I contributed to the debate that made that rule, and therefore I will abide by that rule. That rule wasn't made by my great-great-grandfather and set in concrete in some trust document that all of us are living by, and I do everything I can to get around. No, the rules are there because they're our rules, because they're the way we work as a family, and we've discussed as a family and agreed upon as a family. And all families have rules. Not all families write these rules down. Not all families need to document these rules. But sometimes, most of the rules in families are unwritten. The rule that says, you know, you respect your older sibling or something like that. Or the rule that says that this family member is this archetype and this family member is this archetype. There are unwritten rules by which the family works. But in wealthy families, for various reasons, it can be helpful to document these rules and document these policies so that they can benefit the family and be good for the family, not restrictive on the family. I guess I'm up to number 6. That's probably good enough. You know, Moses had 2 tablets of 5. If I can get five good ones, I'll be happy.
Well, it gives me a good intro to ask for a follow-up interview in the future. It says we have left, the tablets are undone. We need to jump on another call or do this in person with the other ones. One of my favorite moments, this was from all my podcasts, by the way, I just love this, was very informative. The idea of creating a family charter institution is some of the best pieces of advice ever heard. I know we are running out of time. I would love to jump to the last part of the interview. I call this the Alexandrian questionnaire. It's 10 quick questions that are rather deep, but that you can answer out of your gut, so to say, and then I will leave you to hopefully do more important task than this podcast and have another glass of wine. Okay. What's your favorite question, David?
Why?
Favorite word?
Abundance.
Least favorite word?
Stasis.
Book that changed your life?
Probably, actually, no. Communicate, by Claire Mann.
A quote you strive to live by?
Do unto others as they'd have you have done unto you.
If you could resurrect 3 authors from history to add to your personal board of advisors, who would they be and what would you ask them? Doesn't necessarily, it can also be ancestors. It can be just like about this.
Yeah. The first one who comes to mind is Maimonides. So I don't have specific questions for him, but Maimonides is one of my favorite historical characters, a great philosopher, physician, writer, and very much around having finding this medium, this the the perfect mean. Oh, gee, authors. I don't know. I wouldn't mind Kahneman. I'm a big fan of thinking fast and slow. Um, and maybe because I like contrarians, those who are the guys who wrote like Moneyball and one of those sorts of guys. You know who I mean? Money and Freakonomics. That's who I was thinking of.
I watched the movie recently.
I,
An
I
author
like
that,
I like people who. Sorry.
no, please, I interrupted you.
Yeah.
You
No,
like people who,
I think the most important thing. Yeah. When I'm sitting around a board table, my job is to be provocative, to ask questions that might be stupid, but they're not. To get people out of their comfort zone and think about things differently and looking at things differently. And those are the sorts of people that I would want on my board, the people who will challenge the status quo. And when I say challenge it, again, going back to what we said earlier, I mean turn it upside down and start again, but just ask why. Challenge assumptions, understand your assumptions, and always be prepared to hold nothing sacred. In my business, every time a new employee would start, I would say to them, we have a rule around here. And the rule is that you can ask why we do something, and nobody's allowed to say because that's the way we always do it, because that's not good enough. You can always challenge something and say, is there a better way to do this? How can we do this better? Okay, we should never be doing things in a business because that's the way we always did it.
what author comes to mind when you think of the word punchable, David?
Punchable,
Yes.
a punchable author. I don't know. I don't like that question.
We skip it.
It's negative. Okay. There are people who I read and um, and I already know what they're going to write, and I hold them in disdain, but I might read them anyway. But that's what good is that?
If you could send a video message to all the world's leaders today, if they tune in by any chance, feel like the world's going crazy, crazier, I would say, what would that message entail?
Just remember, you are there to serve your people, not the other way around.
If by a miracle you would receive tomorrow an advisory letter from your personal ancestors, David, from your personal ancestry tree, based on the life that you've lived, what do you think it would say to you?
I received a message like that. Okay,
Really?
that's a whole other story. Okay, a bit of a strange story. And the message was, we love you, accept our love.
Walked past a beautiful Jewish cemetery on my way here. They had one-liners on top of it. I think it's called epitaph. And what would be your epitaph or family motto or crest, so to say?
Hmm. Oh, gee. Um, This is the lightning round. I'm supposed to have the first thing that comes to my mind. Um, Look, the one that comes to mind is, love your neighbor as yourself. But I guess that's what I'd like them to say. What will they say? I don't know.
Two questions, then we are done. If we would engrave that, uh, if we would equip that grave with an avatar of yours summoning, and it would consist a message, not interact, just one message, what message would that be so that people find that it's like a truth that you would like to convey to them that could remain stable over time?
We have more in common than what we have different between us as people.
Last question. If post-mortem you would meet God and you guys would sit down and watch a highlight reel of your life, what do you think would be a scene that he would show you that would make him particularly proud?
Okay, that relates to my next project.
This is a beautiful fade out for the interview also, because that would be my follow-up
I know,
question.
okay. So I'm gonna leave you with one of my favorite quotes, and I'm just gonna look it up here. Here it is. Just one second. Okay. So, whoops. Hold on. Sorry. Give me a minute. Um, so Oprah is interviewing Stevie Wonder, and she asks Stevie Wonder, "What are the three songs you're most proud to have introduced to the world?" Stevie Wonder replies, and he quotes Duke Ellington, who was a jazz pianist, and he was asked, "What's your favorite song?" And he says, "I haven't written it yet."
That's a beautiful answer to this question. Where can we find you, David? And for those who are listening, you've always been very helpful. What is something we could do to help you to fuel your adventures and realize your visions?
Very, very easy to find. There's not a lot of David Werdigers in the world, and there's only one davidwerdiger.com. So you can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Insta. I've done a lot of videos over the last few months that relate to my next project, or my current project, I should say. And so if you want, engage, ask me questions. I'm very reachable. Um, and my goal is my current mission, so I've got my family advisory business, but my current theme, in addition to that, is exploring the wealth of time. And time is our greatest asset. And that's so engage with the stuff that I'm doing if you find it interesting. If you find it interesting. I hope you do. But if you do, if you like it, share it with somebody else. If you don't like it, either ignore it or tell me why.
It's been an honor and a privilege to interview you today, David. Thank you so much for making room for this interview. And for everybody who's making room for these long-term, truth-based conversations, I have a special place in my heart for you in this day and age where people hardly can concentrate for longer than 6 seconds. You're a special kind of breed. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you in the next episode.